The grand hall was alive with chatter and excitement, a sea of silk gowns and sharp tuxedos shimmering under the golden glow of crystal chandeliers. The wedding was the event of the year, an affair people would whisper about long after the last champagne glass had been cleared. Daniel moved through the room with polite nods and warm smiles, his presence radiating quiet confidence. Everyone looked at him and thought, there stands the luckiest man alive. After all, he was about to marry Clara, the kind of woman who made heads turn with every step, the kind of woman people said was born to be admired. Daniel's chest swelled with a mixture of pride and nerves as the church bells tolled faintly outside, reminding him that the moment was drawing near. He had built an empire from the ground up, carving his name into the corporate world with persistence and brilliance, and now he was ready to anchor his personal life with the woman he loved. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night had led to this day. He thought of Clara's soft smile, the way she had whispered promises to him under the stars, swearing she loved him for who he was, not what he had. He believed her with his whole heart, and that belief made the hall feel warmer, brighter. Needing a brief escape from the sea of guests and their well-meaning congratulations, Daniel slipped away. He walked down a side corridor, one lined with portraits of saints and faded floral wallpaper, his polished shoes clicking softly on the marble floor. His mind wandered to the vows he had rehearsed countless times. He wanted to say them perfectly, wanted Clara to feel every word. He imagined the look on her face as he spoke, the way her eyes would shine. The thought made him smile to himself. But fate, mischievous and cruel, decided to intervene. As he rounded the corner near the bridal suite, his steps slowed. The door was slightly ajar, light spilling out into the dim corridor. He hadn't meant to stop. He hadn't meant to hear. But a voice floated through the crack, Clara's voice. Familiar, melodic, yet sharpened with an edge he had never heard before. "You really think I love him?" she said, her tone dripping with mockery. Daniel froze. His body turned to stone, his breath caught halfway in his throat. For a moment he thought his mind was playing tricks on him, that perhaps nerves were distorting reality. But then the sound of laughter filled the air, laughter he recognized too well, the deep, confident chuckle of Adrian, his best man, his friend since college, the man he trusted more than anyone. Clara's voice rang out again, clearer this time, with a cruel honesty that pierced through the wall between them. "Please, this marriage is my golden ticket. Once the papers are signed, half his empire will be mine." He's so blinded by love, he doesn't even suspect a thing. Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. The marble floor beneath him felt as though it were crumbling, ready to swallow him whole. Every memory he had of Clara, the way she held his hand, the late-night talks, the promises whispered into his ear, shattered into fragments. He pressed his palm against the wall to steady himself, trying to breathe, but every word from the room cut deeper. Adrian's voice followed, casual and smug. "You're brilliant, Clara. Marrying him is the smartest move you could have made. With his resources, we'll be untouchable. And the best part, he trusts me completely. He'll never see us coming." The sound of Clara's laughter intertwined with Adrian's, a twisted harmony of betrayal. Daniel staggered back, his throat tight, his vision blurring with a haze of disbelief and rage. He wanted to storm in, to tear the door open and confront them, to shout until the whole building shook. But some instinct, some iron grip of self-control held him still. He remained in the shadows, listening, every word etching itself into his memory like fire branding his skin. He couldn't unhear it, he couldn't unknow it. Clara, the woman he thought he would grow old with, was nothing more than a thief in a bridal gown. Adrian, the brother he had chosen for himself, was a snake with a smile. Together they had spun a web, and he was the fool caught in it. Yet even as pain surged through him, something colder began to settle in its place. Betrayal lit the first flame, but vengeance shaped the fire. Daniel straightened slowly, his hands no longer trembling. The weight in his chest began to harden into resolve. If he burst in now, he would look like the broken man they thought he was. They would spin lies, perhaps even convince others that he had misunderstood, that his nerves had clouded his judgment. But if he waited, if he let them walk into the ceremony thinking they had won, he could turn their arrogance into their downfall. The stage was already set, and they were about to hand him the perfect script. He pictured the faces of the guests, the family members, the business associates who had gathered to witness what they thought was love. What greater punishment than to expose the truth before all of them? To strip Clara and Adrian of the masks they wore so proudly, to let the world see their greed and deceit for what it was. Daniel took one last step back from the door. Clara's laughter echoed faintly behind him, sharp and hollow, but he no longer felt paralyzed by it. Instead, a strange calm washed over him. He had built empires out of nothing. He had outwitted competitors who underestimated him. And now, he would outwit the two people who thought they had played him for a fool. He turned down the corridor, his mind racing, weaving possibilities. The wedding would go on. Clara would walk down the aisle in her dazzling gown. Adrian would stand proudly as best man. The vows would be spoken, the audience would watch in rapture. And then, when the moment was right, when their victory seemed secure, Daniel would unveil the truth. He imagined the look on Clara's face when her own words betrayed her, the panic in Adrian's eyes when his duplicity was laid bare. The image brought the faintest hint of a smile to Daniel's lips, not a smile of joy, but of a man who had seen through the lies and chosen not to collapse, but to rise sharper, stronger, more dangerous. By the time he returned to the hall, the whispers of betrayal still echoed in his mind, but they no longer weakened him. They fueled him. He rejoined his guests with steady composure, masking the storm within. No one suspected a thing. They still looked at him as the luckiest man alive, and in a twisted way, perhaps he was, for luck had revealed the truth before it was too late. Daniel adjusted his tie, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Adrian, who raised a glass with a broad grin, utterly unaware that his empire of lies was moments away from crumbling. Clara, radiant and poised, was hidden away, preparing for her grand entrance, unaware that her performance would end in ruin. Daniel's heart no longer ached. It burned with purpose. The altar awaited, the vows awaited, but so did justice. And when the bells tolled again, they would no longer mark the beginning of his marriage. They would mark the beginning of his revenge. The music began with a swell so rich and full that it seemed to lift the very air inside the church. The organist's fingers danced over the keys, sending notes spiraling upward toward the vaulted ceiling where angels painted in fading fresco seemed to look down upon the gathering. Guests shifted in their pews, leaning forward, their eyes bright with anticipation. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the joining of Daniel and Clara, the golden couple whose union promised to be as dazzling as it was enviable. Daniel stood at the altar, his posture erect, his expression calm. To anyone watching, he was the picture of composure, a groom quietly brimming with joy. But beneath that calm mask, a storm raged so fierce it could have torn him apart had he let it. His ears still rang with the poisonous laughter he had overheard, the venom of Clara's words still seeping into his veins. Yet he stood strong, each second sharpening his plan, each heartbeat carrying him closer to the moment where truth would burst free like a lightning strike in a dark sky. The crowd stirred as the doors at the back of the church creaked open. Sunlight spilled in, golden beams cutting through dust motes and illuminating Clara as she appeared on her father's arm. A collective sigh seemed to pass through the assembly. She was breathtaking, wrapped in ivory silk that shimmered with each step, her veil a soft cascade that caught the light like a halo. Her smile was tender, poised, the smile of a woman in love, or at least, the illusion of it. To Daniel, that smile was no longer radiant, it was a blade hidden in silk, a performance practiced to perfection. As Clara walked toward him, Daniel studied her every detail. The delicate way she tilted her chin, the practiced flutter of her lashes, the graceful sway of her gown, all of it designed to charm, to convince, to deceive. To everyone else in that hall, she was purity incarnate. To Daniel, she was a thief walking proudly toward her prize. Adrian stood just behind him, in the place of honor reserved for a best man. Daniel could feel his presence, the smugness that radiated off him in waves. He dared not glance back, but he could imagine Adrian's expression, the faint smirk, the glint in his eyes that came from knowing he shared a secret with the bride. That secret, however, was no longer theirs alone. It belonged to Daniel now, and soon it would belong to everyone in this church. The procession slowed as Clara reached the altar. Her father gave her hand to Daniel, his eyes shining with pride, unaware that he was handing his daughter not into love, but into judgment. Daniel accepted Clara's hand, his grip steady, though his pulse thundered. Her skin was soft, warm, deceptively reassuring. She looked up at him through her veil, eyes glowing with the performance of devotion. He smiled back, but inside, his smile was carved of steel. The priest began to speak, his voice rolling through the cathedral like a steady tide. He spoke of love, of unity, of the sacred bond between two souls. He spoke of loyalty, of the promise to stand together through storms and sun. Each word cut Daniel deeper, for he knew the woman beside him had already betrayed every vow she was about to make. Clara's eyes glistened, feigning emotion as she nodded along, squeezing his hand gently. It was a performance so flawless it would have fooled him just hours before. But now he saw the truth beneath every gesture. The guests sat spellbound, some dabbing their eyes with handkerchiefs. Mothers clasped their children's hands, whispering about how beautiful the bride looked, how lucky Daniel was. Fathers watched with admiration, envious of the empire Daniel had built and now seemed ready to share with a woman of such elegance. No one suspected the rot beneath the perfection. Daniel's chest tightened with the weight of what he carried. He would be the one to tear away the mask. When the priest turned to him and asked him to recite his vows, the church fell silent. Every gaze shifted to Daniel, waiting to hear the words that would seal this union. Clara smiled at him from beneath her veil, expecting him to speak of love, of forever, of devotion. For a moment, he let the silence stretch, his eyes locked on hers, letting her believe the pause was born of emotion. And then he began. "I vow," Daniel said, his voice steady and clear, carrying through every corner of the church, to honor the truth. A ripple of curiosity moved through the crowd. Clara's brow furrowed slightly beneath her veil, her smile faltering for just a fraction of a second. Daniel continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "I vow to expose deceit. I vow to never let betrayal walk beside me, no matter how sweetly it may smile." Whispers erupted among the guests. Clara's lips parted, her expression faltering as confusion washed over her. Adrian shifted slightly behind him, the confidence in his posture dimming. Daniel held up a hand, commanding silence. "There are some truths," he said slowly, "that deserve to be spoken not in shadows, but in the light. Today, in front of you all, I choose to speak them." He glanced toward the back of the church. At his signal, the ushers moved swiftly, drawing curtains across the tall windows until the hall dimmed, leaving only the glow of chandeliers and the twin screens that flickered to life at either side of the altar. The guests turned their heads, puzzled murmurs growing louder. Clara's hand tightened in his, her pulse racing against his skin. Then the recording began. Her voice, unmistakable, filled the hall. "You really think I love him? Please. This marriage is my golden ticket. Once the papers are signed, half his empire will be mine." Gasps erupted. Some women covered their mouths, men frowned in disbelief. Heads turned toward Clara, whose face had drained of color. She shook her head furiously, whispering, "No, no, this isn't." Then Adrian's voice cut through. "With his resources, we'll be untouchable. And the best part, he trusts me completely. He'll never see us coming." The guests twisted in their seats, eyes darting from Clara to Adrian. Adrian's face went pale, his hands twitching at his sides. He looked like a man standing in the center of a storm, realizing too late that he had no shelter. Clara stumbled forward, reaching for Daniel, her voice cracking. "Wait, I can explain, this isn't, someone set this up." But the evidence was undeniable. The sound of her laughter, intertwined with Adrian's, echoed in the hall, mocking, cruel, dripping with greed. The weight of truth bore down on her, and the audience, once enraptured by her grace, now stared with disgust. The priest, shaken, crossed himself and stepped back. Clara's father buried his face in his hands. Mothers pulled their children closer. Guests who had once whispered about the perfection of this union now whispered of greed, of betrayal, of shame. The illusion Clara had crafted so carefully crumbled into dust before them all. Daniel stood unmoving, his expression unreadable, though inside his chest burned with fire and ice in equal measure. He had waited for this moment, and it had unfolded exactly as he had envisioned. He had given her the stage, and she had performed her own ruin. Clara sank to her knees, tears streaming down her face, her veil trembling as she tried to plead, her words drowned by the murmurs of the crowd. Adrian remained frozen, his lips pressed into a thin line, his body rigid as though bracing for a blow. Daniel turned slowly, his gaze sweeping across the assembly, letting them see his composure, his strength, his refusal to be broken. Then he looked back at Clara, his voice calm, measured, final. "This," he said, gesturing toward the screens as the recording faded into silence, "is the truth of the woman I was to marry, and the man I once called brother." A hush fell over the hall, heavy and absolute. Daniel held it in his hand like a weapon, letting it carve deeper than any scream could. He had spoken his vows, not of love, but of truth. And now the entire world knew what Clara and Adrian truly were.